So my name is Eric Elliott, and I'm the Advanced Hunter Education Coordinator with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Tonight, we're going to be talking bone broth. And so I'm going to introduce my presenter tonight. I've got with me retired Captain Roy Griffith. Roy, tell us a little bit about your backstory, your career, and after which I've got a little story about Roy.
Well, just happy to be here tonight, Eric. It's an honor. And just so everybody knows, I'm just a old retired has-been with just enough knowledge to be dangerous. The whole magic of everything you see tonight is from our lieutenant here, who does an outstanding job with this Advanced Hunter Ed program. I was a game warden for 27 years, city police officer for 7 years before that, and park ranger for 3 seasonal years before that. So just kind of a career in the woods, and been hunting since I could walk, tagged along with my father, and then never, sorry, a couple of little hooligans here tonight. Never was into big game hunting till I went away to college and hooked up with a dear friend up there, and haven't looked back. I've just been hooked on it. And kind of the whole purpose of being here tonight is to provide you some techniques and some ideas of what you can do with stuff that way too many people leave in the field. And I'm talking about the delicious bones that and showing our animals we harvest the utmost respect. So the goals for tonight is just what to do with the bones, how to make bone broth, and techniques and recipes for how to put that broth to good use, how to store it for weeks in the fridge or months to years in the freezer or canned. The photo here is of me and my son that hunts. I have a genetic son and I have a son that hunts. That's our astute Captain Sean Olagi, the M3 buck. I had the honor of going on that hunt with him a few years back up in northeastern California. And the little critter there in the picture is my girl Sis, a little blood trailer, and that's a here fighting her aunt, making all the noise here when I was trying to talk to you.
Right on. So I've got some junior high humor for everybody, and my captain might want to plug his ears just for a second. Got a story about Roy. So my brother Chad is a game warden, and he had a canine, and so he trudged into the regional office with his canine, and his canine Jonah didn't miss a heartbeat. Proceeded to hike his leg right up on Roy and urinate right on Roy's uniform pants. And so I don't really know exactly what that says about my brother's dog, or maybe you, Roy. I'm not exactly sure, brother. But
yeah, it was disrespect of his seniors, that's for sure. While I was talking to a good citizen at the counter, answering some citizens. So it didn't just happen in the back room all by ourselves. I'm addressing the public and representing the department, and this young cocky canine officer comes in with his canine and just does what canine officers do, leave a wake.
I think you blame that on me. I think you had the wrong Elliot for a little while, but I had to eventually set you straight. But let's go ahead and get to the why. Why are we here? Why make bone broth, Roy?
Well, you know, those of you that hunted with me know that I really am a firm believer in showing the utmost respect to the animals that we harvest. And part of that is utilizing everything. And I literally utilize everything on a cervid, on a deer or elk, everything from the tongue to the toenails. And I think we owe it to an animal we harvest. Bone broth is extremely nutritious. I am no doctor. I'm going to say that right up front. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm just speaking from an old fart, like I said, who knows too much enough to be dangerous. But it is numerous studies that show that it's great and healthy for supporting collagen and joint health and healthy inside your guts and brain and neurotransmitters. People have all kinds of claims, but I can just tell you straight up from my standpoint, I just feel energized when I have a meal, or even some mornings when I'm just not feeling up to making, having a breakfast, or I just feel that slight cold coming on. Having some bone broth, a quick, simple soup, or just a hot cup of bone broth in the morning.
I
Just,
completely I
Yeah,
completely echo that, Roy. I think that I regularly say if I'm starting to get sick, I'll ask my wife to make some bone broth or even some venison. And it just seems like it has a health effect that keeps me from getting more sick. So, again, we're not doctors, but I think it's more subjective and experiential.
yeah, you get certain amino acids from the meat proteins itself, from that steak you're eating, but there's a whole other set of amino acids that come out of the collagens and out of the bone and all that stuff that would just go to waste. And you just,
Yeah.
I don't know, to me, it just feels nutritious, just feels, I can feel it. Like I want to believe it's doing all those good things to me, but we're just going to briefly touch on the nutritional values. And that's where I just encourage you all to go do your own research and just look into this, and you'll be amazed of what a lot of the stuff that is claimed it does for you. And let alone, it just takes anything you're making to a whole new level. I mean, if you're just making soup, rather than just making your soup stock with water, starting with a good healthy bone broth, if you're making rice, noodles, anything, it just adds a whole nother nutritional and wow factor to whatever you're cooking.
Mhm. Really good points.
This
But
is
let's
my
get
picture of my niece and her elk last year in Arizona. I had the honor of going down there on their hunt with them in Arizona, and just we had a wonderful time.
let's get down to the nitty gritty. So work us through this process. And so, what are you doing with your saw here?
Well, unfortunately, elk bones, these are the bones from Captain Olagi's elk this year, and they they don't fit in a pot too well. You're starting with it's pig, small bear, small deer. Maybe you don't have to do this, but for big bones, just kind of you got to get them broken down so you can manage them into whatever pot you're using. And I also want to believe that exposing that marrow and the bone, and you're going to get even more value out of them by breaking them down like this rather than trying to cook with them whole. I use a sawzall. I use a fine blade because I find it makes less chips. Always, safety glasses, gloves, a must. And I got a blade that I just dedicate just to this. I've hand sawed them when I in camp and stuff with a bone saw. But just the sawzall just makes quick work of it. And the bone meal there, obviously you don't want to put that. I give them a rinse to get that off of them. But I'll sprinkle that on my dog food on their bowls, and they just go nuts. I mean, that's just incredibly nutritious stuff for the dog. So again, the whole story is nothing goes to waste. And then of course, you need a pot large enough to accommodate all this. And we'll talk more about the pot selections later. But main thing I really want to emphasize is garbage in, garbage out. The whole purpose of all this to make a really healthy product for you. So use good water. I mean, not going to bag on the folks from Southern California, but I can remember going to my grandma's house as a kid in Anaheim, and I wouldn't even want to bathe in the water. It was so caustic. I'm fortunate enough to live up here in God's country, and I feel very comfortable with the water that comes out of my spigot in El Dorado County. But you can use distilled water, just quality water, quality ingredients, quality sea salt. I use the good stuff. This real salt is, mined. They say it's hundreds of thousands of years old before it had any impact of man, and hydrocarbons and microplastics. It, comes from way underground, not surface sea salt. So again, you are what you eat. Using good products or apple cider vinegar, use the good stuff. Why not? You're worth it. This is where you get creative. A lot of people laugh at putting any kind of vegetables in their stock because you got two roads you want to go down. You want to make it complex up front and put a lot of yummy ingredients in it, or you want the absolute bare bones bone stock and then do all these creative things later. I'm kind of in the middle of the road where I like to use some stock vegetables because almost everything I'm going to do with this bone broth later is going to be a soup, or even if I'm just sipping on it, I know what I put in it, so I know the profile that it already has. But this is it's like a painter's palette. This is just where you all can get creative, and sky's the limit of what direction you want to go. I'm a firm believer in that tomatoes, again, they have an acid base, so there's going to be assisting some of that leaching process. to get the goodness out of those bones. So I like to use some tomatoes in most of my stocks, onions, garlic, of course, bay leaves out of my yard, mushrooms. Then some people get pretty crazy. You can turmeric. There's, all kinds. I don't mean, I go down the road of health values of turmeric, but there's a lot of people that make bone stocks using turmeric because they believe in the health values of that alone. So, but I don't like to put it in most of my stocks because it has a very distinct flavor profile of its own, and that kind of limits what you can do with it later. So, but you want to get all the stuff chopped up and ready to go, so you can put it in the oven. I like to put whatever I'm putting in my stock pot, I like to put it in the oven with the bones. On a nice cookie sheet, something big enough where they can be spread out like this, so they all get exposed to the heat. And then sprinkle your vegetable stock or your onions and stuff can lay in a mat underneath this. Because the key of that is you want that good clean foil or something there, because after you put this in the oven, you're going to bake it at 425. And this again, I'm not going to give you all the answers tonight. I'm giving you just the bare bones. People argue that you need to do it for hours. I'm kind of in the point where I don't like to cook. I don't like to fracture these bones and burn them. I just like to get a little bit of char on them and get all those meat bits and cartilage and stuff, have a little bit of browning. So I go 35, 40 minutes, at 425. And somewhere after 15, 20 minutes, you want to turn them over. Just keep an eye on everybody's stoning, gas versus electric. Y'all are going to figure out real quick, how your oven responds and how bones responds to your oven. You don't want to burn them. You just want that nice roasted glaze on them. So this is just where it gets. So this is kind of what I shoot for, is this look here. Nice golden brown. Same with the vegetables, but you'd be surprised how much goodness cooks out of it in just this amount of time. So that's where you want to get your rubber spatula and what have you, and scrape all that goodness, everything that you see here, into your pot. And this is where we're going to talk in a minute here about all your options you have here. But a good pot, that, the bigger the better, depending on what kind of a bones you're using and what kind of stock you're after. If you're after just a really thick cartilage base, like almost gelatin stock when you're done, you're only just going to barely cover these bones with water. But you want to keep an eye on it, because again, you're going to be cooking these things 12 minimum hours to 24 hours on a stovetop. I go full 24 hours. I turn it down really low when I go to bed at night, but it just it gives your house such an amazing. I'd like to do this in the winter. Obviously, it's a hard thing to do in the summertime when your house is already 100 degrees. But they always say if you're going to sell your home, they always say to bake an apple pie because the smell it gives when people walk into your house. But I say if you're going to sell a home, and you're going to try to sell it to carnivores, man, put on a load of bone stock, because it just is a wonderful, wonderful smell. But you're going to babysit that. And then this is where you don't forget your apple cider vinegar and sea salt. The salting is based, again, on part of preserving it, but also part of the leaching process and flavor profile. And some people might have low sodium diets, then you could go a little lighter on the salt. But I go, a full tablespoon of salt per gallon of water, kind of a thing. That's kind of sounds salty, but again, remember, this is just a base that you're using for cooking other stuff. Vinegar to that pot we just looked at, the 4 to 6 to 8 quart pot, a good quarter cup of vinegar, because the vinegar is crucial for a number of things, for the preservation and for that leaching process. It's what really involved in leaching all the goodness out of those bones. And then, you got to go with what you got. I'm a fan of low and slow, old school, on top of a stove top, but people do this with pressure canners, which speeds up the process, depending on what kind of pressure canner you have. And I'm no pressure canner expert by any means, but read the manual, get to know your pressure canner, and, YouTube. There's so many different ideas out there, and there's people that I know on YouTube would be saying half the stuff I'm telling you tonight is crazy because they do it this way. Like there's a guy on YouTube that just calls anybody that puts vegetables in their bone stock crazy. And so
Hmm.
there's more than one way to skin a cat, but I am old school stovetop, but you also have the option of pressure canner. And if you got nothing else, you can do it. Years ago, I used to do this in a crock pot. You know, we all use a crock pot. And all of the above, though, you just kind of got to watch your water levels until you get to know your heat and your stove top. Like the stove top I have now is just it's I got electric, and it is the hardest thing to keep at a simmer because it's either it's rocking and rolling or it doesn't go at all. So
So on this, if you were working with a stovetop, Roy, would you err on the side of too much cooking? Could you, like this 12 to 24 hours, would you be like, okay, let's work a happy medium somewhere around 18 hours? Or what does, when do you know to get that off the stove?
you know when your bones are you pull up a bone, get a pair of your kitchen tongs and pull a bone up, and all that goodness should just be falled off. It should almost be rendered down to just white.
Got it.
Be any of that cartilage sticking anymore. You never want to burn it. That's where you really want to be careful is that you never want to get that burned flavor. So you just want to keep it at that low simmer, just simmering all that time. Above, it's just not boiling and not just sitting there warm, but just that slow simmer. And um, again, a lot of this is you're going to have to trial and error with your own mechanisms that you're using in stovetop. But you cover those bones with your water and stock and you let it go for 12 to 24 hours. You can't go wrong. You really can't mess this up. You will come up with something that's incredible. And then you
Yeah.
just start working on it and refining it. But it's not like we're not making a souffle here. There's
Oh,
really yeah, there's really not too many mistakes you can make other than completely going to work and forgetting it on and coming home to a half empty pot of bones. You want to, I've never had to add more water because I'm from the school of filling it all the way to the top. I like a lot of stock, but,
mhm.
um, you know, so we've let it go for 24 hours or 18 hours, whatever we've decided or we've done in our crock pot. And now it's time to cool it, strain it, and create your stock. I like to use a funnel strainer like this because I have a wooden, what do they call that thing, the modeler, that just goes down in there and pushes stuff through. I let it drain
Right.
clean. I kind of like, so I let the first couple loads just go clean. And then I'll have like one jar that I know I'm going to use within the next few days. And that's where I'll just crush that stuff down into it, through it, and just get all that goodness um, down through. But I don't necessarily want to push all that stuff into my pure clean stock. So like, here's your beautiful final product. This is preserved, this has been canned, and this can sit on in my shelf for a couple, it never lasts that long, but it's good for years.
Yeah. So how about the stuff that's caught in the strainer? Is that edible? What do you do with that?
Yeah, that's the chef's reward.
Oh
I'll
yeah.
grind that all up and get a piece of sourdough bread with butter and spread that on there, and just nothing goes to waste. I wouldn't, it doesn't, again, that's why I kind of use that last jar that I model it down. And these jars you see in this picture here, or those are the pure strains. So you got to let this cool. You can't handle it when it's red hot, but you can't try to strain it once it's already cooled because immediately what happens is, your lard, your tallow starts settling off to the top. And you
Mhm.
got to provide enough time for that to settle off so you can, because you don't want to try to, if you're just going to be using it in the next few days, you could just leave that in the jar and put it in the fridge if you know you're using it tomorrow for XYZ. But if you're going to long-term can it like this, I like to get that fat, that tallow out. You can just still see some very fine, settlings of maybe little bits of fat that I didn't quite get out settling in the bottom here. That's just all goodness. But we're going to talk here in a bit about what to do with all that fat. But so that's where your time you're cooling it on the countertop just to allow the tallow to separate. And once that's separated, there's, you can either spoon it off, there's fat separators, there's, again, if a lot of times I'm just gonna put the whole jar in the fridge and let it cool completely, and then you literally take the tallow off like a chunk of wax, sitting on the top the next day. And that's, that's, again, we're not wasting that. That comes in, we've all been hearing about all the wonderful uses of tallow now, and everybody, animal fats were so bad for us years ago, and now they're finding out that animal fat is actually so much better for us than these processed, man-made vegetable oils and what have you. So I don't waste any of that. I, you haven't lived, you've had elk or deer fat fries, French fries, cooked. I don't deep fry, I just oven fry, just coat them in all that and oven bake them, coated in that, and duck fat. Oh my goodness, duck fat fries, and it's good stuff. But yeah, so
Yeah.
it just depends on, again, which way, what road we're going down as far as preservation. If we're gonna long-term can it, if we're gonna freeze it, then if you're gonna freeze it, then I would also recommend just put it in the fridge, letting it completely cool, because it's so much easier getting the tallow off when you have it cold, because it's literally gonna be like a little block of fat wax, sitting on the top of your jar.
So tell
There
us
we
about
go.
this process,
Yeah,
allowing
there
the
you
lard
go.
to separate. Tell
Yeah,
us how you do this.
that's a really good example of that picture of, that's a 2-quart jar. So you can kind of get a feel for, that's double of this, how much fat came up out of a very lean elk.
Mm,
Just those joints are, and that stuff's just, it's goodness, it's just, that's
yeah.
so good for you. Think about what lubricates our joints. What's in the middle of our, it's the same stuff that, you're just repurposing that incredible wild animal collagens and stuff and putting them in your own body. That, just good stuff. But yeah, that little layer there you see on top of the very denoted color change there, that's just the pure broth from the tallow that's sitting on top.
So what do you do with the lard? How do you preserve that? Do you just usually put that in the fridge? Can you freeze that, Roy?
Yeah, all the above. I right now in my freezer right over here, I have at least 30 or 40 3/4 cup increments of bear fat from my buddy Daryl Stevenson's bear this last year, and I covet that. I mean, I'll help anybody out cleaning a bear if I can go home with a bucket of fat. And because that just, there's no pastry on the world better than bear lard pastry. So that it does freeze very well. It's stable in the fridge for, I've had it in the fridge for months. I got some duck fat in there right now. Um, Waiting to make some more fries, but freezing is most stable. Bear
Yeah.
fat, for instance, is liquid at room temperature. That's why it makes such incredible pastries.
Mhm.
So it has to be frozen to keep it good. And then when you're making your pastry with it, I actually grate it while it's frozen into the flour. Otherwise, you touch it and it's melting in your fingers.
Wow.
Yeah, great question though. Yeah, it just depends on
How
the
much,
fat.
just out of curiosity, how much fat, how much lard would you get off of like a deer bones, like a average size blacktail? Would it depend on like the age class of the deer, or do you usually are you able to get some fat off of even like a splendor deer?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, all the joints healthy.
Yeah,
Again, it's the first thing that goes in their health is they start consuming, cannibalizing their own fat to get through the winter. But if, again, we're looking at a very healthy elk right here,
wow,
Loggy's elk, and that these are just bones and joint bones that you're seeing in that picture right there. And that's how much fat per 2 quarts of bones. Now, I'm
amazing.
not talking, there's a whole other game if we want to talk about rendering back fat and fat off the hindquarters and everything. That's,
Yeah,
like the bear fat I'm talking about wasn't rendered from bones. That was just rendered from those
right.
big chunks of lard on their heinies. That's whole other,
Awesome.
we'll do that webinar next year. Fat
Yeah,
rendering.
I love it.
I like it. So storage options, refrigerator, couple of weeks, month, if you're gonna use it right away, that's a great way of doing it. And then if you're gonna freeze it, I really recommend, I got these really, I should have brought one out, but plastic quart-sized containers make a really nice, you can buy them at Sam's Club and dollar store and whatever, just like almost like they make for when you go to the Safeway and you buy counter salads and stuff, and they send you home in that 1/2 quart, 2 quart plastic things. I don't recommend Ziploc baggies because they're so prone to getting punctured in your freezer and just stuff happens. But I'd really recommend if you're freezing it, do it in meal-sized portions that you could easily grab and utilize for making rice or whatever down the road. And then longest term is pressure canning. This broth here is going to be good for years, shelf stable, somewhere cool and dark. And pints you do, again, whole other, we'll talk about that in a minute, whole other clinic, but webinar. But it's an easy process is what I'm trying to say. Anybody with an experience in pressure canning, just 60 minutes for the pints and 75 minutes at 10 pounds for the quart size I was just showing there. But we have Eric and I did a webinar last year on canning wild game. So if you use that link and it's on the department's website, you can just learn everything you've ever wanted to know about pressure canning. But I'm a huge fan. It just in this day and age of uncertainties and it's just nice to have food source that does not require refrigeration and is shelf stable for years. What makes it really nice is, being able to grab a jar of your own kokanee and take this camping with you, or, it's a wonderful dinner. Just steam up some rice and open up a jar of kokanee and right over rice with some nice collard greens out of your garden. And talking about broth, even fish have broth. I mean, this kokanee went into the jar just packed. There's no liquids we're putting with it. And so there's even a bone broth, a fish bone broth, that's coating these kokanee for years to come. So the sky's the limit on this stuff, folks. I mean, it's just, I'm a big fan of making a product that's healthy and shelf stable that you can take camping on. Nothing more fun than on a camping or fishing trip, bringing out some meat or that you have preserved and harvested yourself previous years and sharing that with folks in the campground.
On this slide, Roy, it's looking to me like it could be just the lighting, but it looks like some of the bone broth is darker. Is it common to have, like, even in the same batch, maybe just because of the way you poured it, maybe off the top they get different,
Yeah,
some darker,
earlier
some
I was talking about that later pour. I do the
yeah.
first your clean pours, and then as you get to the bottom of the pot, it's not uncommon that you get some of that darker, richer stuff. And you could mix it all up and rejar it, but I kind of, I know what I got and I know what I'm going to use it for. So, but again, that last push where I push that stuff through the strainer, I don't long-term jar like this. So we got all this delicious bone broth. What do we do with it? I was talking about earlier. Again, it takes every meal to a whole other dimension. It's just it takes your just basic rice, basic soup, basic stew, and just takes it 5 levels up. And this is just a wild game meat in a jar. And I can't take credit for this one. It came out of the, so many sources for this, just the Ball canning book. Really recommend, especially if you're going to be canning stuff, you get a good recipe that's time tested. But we have a link to this recipe at the end. But this is basically like a stroganoff in a jar, and it's wild game, a couple of pounds of wild game, onions, mushrooms, tomato sauce, tomato paste, bay leaf, garlic, and then you fill it. This is the only time I've ever done anything where you fill it with liquid and then pressure can it. And these things,
Wow.
these things are so good. I mean, again, imagine being in the campground and bringing out a jar of your homemade elk stew, elk stroganoff. You can add a couple tablespoons, big heaping tablespoons of sour cream to this to thicken it up. Serve it over noodles, and it's just like stroganoff. Serve it over rice. Just an amazing. meal in a jar.
Love it. So let's talk about going from the slide off to the left, the picture off to the left, to what you've got cooking on off to the right. Tell us
Yeah,
about.
well, first I got to tell you about the gentleman in this picture. That's Vic Kapoor. He's one of these people that just makes you proud to be an American. Adult onset hunter. I just took him out. This is his first turkey. I met him at one of Captain Olagi's upland game wood clinics. Came here from India as a young person, been here 20 some years, but he's so thankful of our country and so thankful for the right to hunt. And he makes me look bad. I mean, he even takes the bones after he cooked everything off of them, grinds them down and makes something out of that. But I had the honor of taking Vic out to get him his first turkey and taught him the right way from the get-go. I don't know, for years I didn't know any better, with turkeys of how incredible. Yeah, I'll give away the breast and the drumsticks and everything if I just get the carcass. Turkey carcass, turkey bones makes the best soup you've ever had in your life. I mean, this wild turkey bone carcass is incredible. If I had nothing else to eat for the rest of my life, I could get by on that. It makes the most hearty, wholesome soup stock. And again, the same principle. We're just going to take that turkey carcass after you've removed the breasts that are. I mean, I see a wild turkey. You can't just take the turkey and throw it in the oven like you cook. People make that mistake so often thinking, and then they want to say how terrible and dry and tough it was. These birds have no fat. They're not raised in a big pen, 30% fat. They have to work for a living and they don't have much fat on them at all. So the breast meat goes into kebabs, the drumsticks go into stew or bone stock. The thighs you can barbecue, but you cannot cook a whole turkey. You break it down, and always say you get 4 separate meals out of each turkey. But the carcass we're going to treat the same way we did with the mammal bones. We're just going to break it down, and again with our vegetables and stock materials, roast them in the oven for 40 minutes, 35 minutes, a little less because it's, just turkey bone, but I do them a little lower. I do them at 325 to 350, not quite as hot as the large game bones.
Right.
And then in a pot, and away you go. And this recipe is also linked at the end of our webinar here. And bone stock is not limited to mammals and turkeys. I mean, ducks make an incredible. I mean, here again, I am with my son that hunts with a beautiful limit of ducks that I had the fortune of going on. He's an elitist. He likes to shoot his teal, but we see the next slide. Sometimes he coerces you into shooting spoonies, and here, here's my spoonies that he told me were teal. His eyesight wasn't what it used to be. This morning, this season, a couple of weeks back, he's told me take it. Well, I'm no duck hunter. I just go duck hunting because the boy likes to duck hunt. I like to hang out with him. So I shot a spoonie or two, and but boy, I tell you what, you haven't lived. You've had what I call my dirty duck ramen. You duck stock and same thing, just in the oven, nice roast on them, and get those bones and veggies all charred and flip them over a few times. And look at that. And then the photo on the right, how much broth and stuff is already just coming off those birds just in the oven. And into a pot, just enough water to cover them all. Again, 12 to 18 hours. I don't do them overnight because they're just little birds. But let it cool overnight. The next morning, pick all that meat off the bones and chop up that meat and all that stock. And then this is where I'm not going to give you a recipe for ramen because it'd be like taking the wings off a butterfly. This is where you just get to be creative. But and then same thing with the stock, the fat that comes off of it's those little birds made more fat than like we were looking at earlier, that 2-quart jar of elk stock and just that little layer of fat. Those ducks you saw in that picture probably created, in a 2-quart jar, this much fat. They're fatty little burgers, and that duck fat is just, there's so many fun things you can do with it, from the, like the fries we were talking about, or just searing a little ribeye steak in it. And, oh, you can, I mean, I think you can buy duck fat at the fancy high-end grocery stores, like whatever the World Market or whatever the ones called Whole Foods. And I think it's more, it costs more a pound than a ribeye steak. But
Yeah. Really,
um,
the fact that you're using all aspects of the game, and I love that about you, and you've taught me more about that. And in the last few years, we used to bone out all of our elk and a lot of our deer. And after we started to make this bone stock in the Elliott household, um, we've been doing like this foo stuff. Have you ever done that where you're like just cutting, whether it's venison or elk, into little tiny strips and then just like dunking it into the bone broth? Have you ever tried that?
yeah, well, that's kind of like what I do here is I get that stock boiling, and then I cook the noodles separately because I don't want them sucking up all my good broth. Doesn't matter, but depends on how much broth I have. But you know, just like you said, just thinly sliced meats or your shrimp or whatever. So you're just dropping them in. We splurged and got some scallop here a few weeks
Ooh,
ago and just dropped some scallops into that. But yeah, you don't boil any of those veggies. You just bring that stock to a boil and then drop all that stuff in and just almost turn it off immediately and let that set for 5 minutes. And it's just outrageous. But you brought up a good point, like out of state. Let's talk about chronic wasting for a minute and out of state rules. And people have this mere misconception that they can't bring. Well, someone will say, "Well, I can't bring bones back." CWD, the state will no. The only thing you can't bring back is brain and spinal cord. You can bring back from out of state your hindquarters on the bone. I do it all the time. Of course, that just applies to cervids, but antelope, is no problem, no CWD concerns at all. Make a lot of good antelope stock. But so for folks going out of state, just remember, you can't bring back the spinal cord or the brain. The skull cavity has to all be cleaned and not brought back in the state, but you can bring the long bones, which that's what we're really after for this bone stock. But yeah,
yeah,
but yeah, just reminded me when you talked about you and your we've all, yeah, but people ought to know you don't just, you're not a tailgate hunter, man. Eric packs his critters out from 6, 10, 14 miles in. So there's a reason the Elliott family used to leave their bones in the woods because the poor horses aren't getting any younger.
yeah, that's for sure. So I think as you were talking about this, let's just say we've got a few listeners and they're like, all right, I don't have any wild turkey at my disposal right now. I just thought of maybe a way that the listeners can do this. And so when we go to Costco, we're buying those whole chickens, and um, I'm deboning them when we get home. But my wife will never let me just throw away the bones, and she's always making stock with that. So, I mean, do you think that's a good way to maybe get started with this and just kind of experiment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That and get to know your local butchers. Like my local area where I would go, I live in El Dorado County. I'd go to Forklift is our kind of like that kind of market. But there's a lot of markets that specialize and they don't, they sell their knuckles and all that stuff.
Right.
It's the stuff that used to be thrown away. There's a price for it all now. They're not going to give it to you. But and again, I really recommend garbage in, garbage out. I think I would, if I was going all this trouble and wanting to make a wholesome product for my family, I'd be looking for organic beef bones, right? I wouldn't want to be using something that came from Argentina and God knows what it was exposed because that's where all these long-term chemicals are stored in the bones and the fat and the collagens. That's why it's so important to have uh, organic, free range food. Talk to if you have hunting friends. I mean, I haven't shot an elk in like, I don't know, 10 years or something, but I go on 2 or 3 elk hunts. I went on three different hunts, 3 different states, 5, 6 different tags last year. I didn't have a tag for any of them. I'm just a tag along. And most people I hunt with don't do anything with their bones, so I'm just a scavenger, you know, I'm bringing back, I got, I bring back elk tongue, elk
Wow.
bones, whatever I get my hands on, the stuff that they don't want anyway, and they think I'm crazy, but I'm like in an elk camp this year, taking tongues out of people's elk heads that they brought back to camp and thought I was a scavenger, but well, you haven't lived, you've had, elk lingua tacos. You can ask
Yeah,
Captain Kalagi about that. I made him a believer.
I love it, Roy. I think that, I mean, this is going to sound corny maybe to some, but when when I see ducks, or when I see this last year, we were driving around looking for deer, and we found a bunch of antelope. And I think it was literally an unconscious thought that came into my mind when I was looking at those critters. It was like, that is such good eating. It was like I don't know. It's just, especially when you know how to cook it like you do, Roy. It's just such a treat, and it just brings out a whole another reason why you hunt. I mean, everybody likes to eat wild game, but when you can learn some of the recipes that you've shared with me, it's like you see a dead duck, it's no longer like, oh man, I got to clean this. You're actually looking forward to uh, to eating it. So, does that sound corny to you, Roy?
Oh, heck no. No, I'm with you
Okay,
100%. I think when I get Captain Olagi into some of these spoony French fries, I don't think I'm gonna be able to stop him from shooting spoonies, man.
yeah, right on.
No, no, I think again, the whole purpose of this webinar was, to show the animals we harvest the utmost respect. And you can't do anything more than that, than literally utilizing from their tongue to their toenails and everything in between. It just, yeah, we owe them that. When you take an animal's life and harvest it, that's the respect we owe them. So here's the links we talked about. They're on for that stew in a jar and the turkey bone soup, and we had a
If
lot of
you
fun. I mean, I had some hand in that years ago when we made the original Advanced Hunter Ed cookbook, but that came out of the Advanced Hunter Ed program cooking clinics we used to do, and that was some of the most fun I ever had. Just some of the stuff I think, is my coot fajita recipe still in there? That was always the first thing gone at those seminars, just the coot fajitas, and
I think it's still in there, brother.
it better be. I mean, that's copyrighted. That's good stuff, man. You haven't lived, you've had coot fajitas. I know.
Well,
Olagi, are you squirming on how I say fajita?
I love it.
There is no R in fajita.
Fajita. Watch out, you
So,
spoony killer.
so these are some of the resources. Uh, so Roy's given us permission to. So if you can hit him up on email and ask him for some. If you've got questions about this webinar or about cooking in general, cooking wild game. Yeah, so every year we do a retired warden shoot, and Roy has us over at his house, and he's um, I think I was the last to go last year, Roy, just devouring every bit of your cooking. So hit
This
Roy
year
up.
we're gonna do the full-blown pizza oven this year. We're gonna do cook pizza. I'm gonna have a whole bunch of pizza makes in here. We're gonna do the pizzas after the shoot.
I love it.
Yeah.
Of course, you can hit me up for anything, any questions. Nothing's off limits, guys. If you got regulation questions, shoot me a text, shoot me an email, and I'll do my best to answer it. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find someone who does and get back to you. And then this is the link to the canning webinar that Roy and I did. And with that, this is our last slide, brother. With that, I think we'll close out the webinar. Roy, I want to thank you again for being on here tonight. Thanks for your willingness to serve the hunting community and continue to serve lifelong service to the public. And then even after retirement, you're busting tail. So thank you so much, man.